Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to New Wave Global. I'm Rabia Mehmood. New Wave is an independent news site which looks at the world through a South Asian lens and relies on your feedback. Please do subscribe, like, comment, and also engage with our work. Our guest for today is Zakir Thaver, a documentary filmmaker from Karachi. Zakir's debut film, which he also developed and produced, was Salam, the first Muslim Nobel Laureate. Salam received critical acclaim the world over. It was released on Netflix in 2019. He's currently producing documentaries on the Qawwali maestro from Pakistan, Faisalabad, in fact, the legendary Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and on Adam Osborne, the inventor of the portable computer. Zakir, welcome to New Wave Global.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you quite a few things, but first, can we speak about the film you are working on at the moment? That is Ustad, the film, which I believe is the working title. How did this story come to you? And also, please tell us about Chain of Light, Nusrat's lost album, which was discovered in the UK. It had these unreleased recordings of Nusrat's songs, and this album was released in September last year, I believe. And I was also at the album launch event in Lahore, and I believe you had quite a few album launch events the world over, a few in Pakistan and also in the UK, US. And I remember listening to some of the Qawwalis and watching this long, extended teaser from the documentary, and its impact on the audience was so profound. People had goosebumps, people had tears in their eyes. It was just a very powerful teaser because it had some original footage and it had these powerful bits of testimony about Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and also the Qawwalis were mesmerizing. So please tell us more about the album and the documentary.
So uh, it wasn't my idea. My colleague and friend Saina Bashir came up with the idea. I think she was in Yusuf Salahuddin's Haveli, and it suddenly dawned on her that he would perform here, and he would apparently also compose some tracks of Dead Man Walking, or thought of them, in one of the rooms. And she started wondering about why there isn't a cinematic scale scope documentary on Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. So she spent a year and a half working on it, developing it. She reached out to me, and initially I started advising her on sort of, what to do, what not to do. But then eventually she wrote me in to come on board formally as a producer. So we've spent about 3 years now uh, filming a whole bunch of interviews. We filmed Michael Brook, Peter Gabriel, Khan Saab's physician, uh, Rahat, his tabla player, his managers. And we've also amassed a whole bunch of archives. So, which is supremely important to do, right? If you're making a film on a dead man, how do you bring the person back to life? So you need to have as many archives as possible. And we're still looking for archives. There's a lot that's in Faisalabad that hasn't really been preserved other than on VHS tapes. And the people who have it don't quite know what it is, so they're looking for it, which we hope results in them being able to find it, because archives are the heart and soul and lung of any given documentary. So it's looking very exciting. We've learned a lot. We've come to know a lot about him. The more we learn, the more we're appreciative of how just incredible a guy he was. And yeah, we think it's a fantastic story.
Yes.
And it's a tragedy because he died at 48. His life was cut short at the peak of his career. About the album, we came upon rather serendipitously. Saina, my colleague, was interviewing Michael Brook and happened to ask him what he was working on. And he said, well, I can't tell you. But then obviously he was also interested in telling us. So he called this person at Real World, sought permission, and then told us he was working on a new album. and told us the story about how someone at Real World Records, this is Peter Gabriel's company in the UK, was going through the archives and found a tape that said Nusrat on it, and kind of knew even then that this was something that had been lost and that he just found it. This person would often be reprimanded for spending too much time in the archives and too much time away from his desk. And it's interesting how one fine day he shows up with the ultimate redemption and plonks it on his boss's desk and goes, I found something interesting. And they had it digitized. And turns out, well, two things. A, the sonic quality is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It had to be baked and preserved. And we made a short documentary on the entire process. The other thing was it comprised 4 tracks, one of which Khan Saab hadn't sung before anywhere else. So it was wholly new. The others he'd sung elsewhere, but these were incredible studio recordings on 8 tracks. Michael Brook mixed this album, and it dropped in September. It was a wonderful thing to have happened to us because, when making a documentary, right, discovering in the process that an album has been found after 34 years uh, is quite something. And so we decided to do these album launch events, and the British Council generously supported this initiative. And we had album launch events in Pakistan, the UK, France, where we played our teaser, like you said, and played excerpts from the album itself.
Hmm.
So it was a sneak peek. The album wasn't out then, so our audience got to hear the album excerpts well before it was released.
Yes. So, which song was the unreleased one, which no one had heard before, of the
It was
four?
Ya Ghaus Ya Mira.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And of course, I want to speak about the archives part, because that's what you do as well. That's your expertise, archives, and you nerd out on this stuff. And it's not just expertise; you're deeply interested, and that's how you Salam also happened, right? It was so much of that was just like gathering archival material. So, but we're going to come to the archives part of it, but I also quickly want you to tell us how was the feedback and public reaction when at the album launch event, and when you showed people that very powerful short teaser which you have been showing at all these events, specifically from people outside Pakistan as well, because where I believe the audience would be mixed and not just Pakistanis. Yeah.
Oh, it's gone down really well. People have loved it. People have loved it. The archives also have never before the teaser also has never before seen archives. So even those very familiar with Nusrat ended up watching stuff they'd never seen before. Uh, there's this montage of Hall, several people in different settings having Hall, uh, which we put together after combing through hours and hours and hours of archives. We also have Khan Saab playing basketball and shooting a three-pointer.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, uh, People were really moved, and interestingly, it all fell into place rather well. So this was content pulled from disparate places.
Mm.
And how do you weave it into a coherent 9-minuter? How do you tell a story using it? And so different things came from different places and came together really well. Um, so, for
Okay.
example, when Michael Brooks says, he was at 10% power when he wasn't singing, it's like he came to life when singing. Otherwise, he was a very low key personality. And we found the perfect headline to go with it, which says, "I sing, therefore I am."
Mm.
So it's interesting how these disparate elements came together, newspaper headlines. It all connected and fell into place really well. People loved it. To answer your question, uh,
Mm.
and this is why one sort of makes films, right? It's the endorphin buzz you get when people appreciate what you've spent hours and hours and hours putting together.
Mm.
So yeah, knock on wood, people found resonance with it. Also, there was such affection for Nusrat, right? Everyone had a memory of having listened to Nusrat at a particular super emotional part in their lives. Uh, Nusrat evokes very strong emotions. Uh,
Mm.
he means so much to all of us Pakistanis.
Yeah. And I believe our generation was the last generation that saw him when he was alive, like when he was on television in real time in a way, and have gone to events maybe where Nusrat was, right?
Right.
And
Yeah. Died in
yeah,
1997.
yes.
I think his last performance in Pakistan, at least, was in 1996. So yes, I think ours was the last
Yeah,
generation
yeah. And, when
alive.
he was on television, when he was alive, and remember when he passed away. But he was he was everything like maestro, icon, legendary, towering figure. And I think one of the first people who was called this sort of world musician in a way. And he had a massive following, not just in South Asia, of course, in South Asia, but also like in Pakistan and India, Bangladesh, elsewhere, but also in the West, in Japan, and like all these places.
Yeah.
So you also met people who had archives of Nusrat from all these countries. Can you tell us more, because now we're coming to the archives part of it, like as to what are some of the pieces, or what's the footage that you got uh from from outside South Asia or outside the US or the UK?
So the best pieces of archives have come from France because he
Hmm,
was huge in France,
hmm,
and
hmm,
there's some incredible material that we got from French filmmakers. Sadly,
hmm,
one person filmed him for over a year, but ended up losing their footage. Interestingly, that's exactly what happened to another French filmmaker
hmm.
who's lost the raw footage. Um,
Okay.
he tells this crazy story of Khan Sahib uh, being accosted by these mullahs and being told that music is haram. And he got extremely angry, slammed the door on their faces, then changed into swimming trunks and jumped into a pool to cool off. All that we have and all that remains is Khan Sahib in a pool,
Okay.
teaching others who are in the pool with him to sing. But what an incredible story, and it's lost. It's lost forever.
Yeah.
Um, which is the saddest part in the life of an archive producer when you hear this amazing story of what was captured on film but has been
Hmm,
lost forever.
hmm,
Um, if interestingly, I was told similar stories about some of the archives I did end up finding for Salam. So you don't want to believe it because, had I listened, had I believed people who said they'd lost footage forever, I wouldn't have found the gems that I did find. So even when told that no, it's lost forever, I will continue searching for it for a bit, at least. Well, at times for more than a bit.
hmm,
But in Japan, he was called the singing Buddha. They were enamored with his music. One doesn't understand quite why. Wouldn't I mean? Here's a man singing in a language they can't understand, yet they're so moved by it. Um, he sang. There's something interesting about his performances. At least I find in Faisalabad and in France, he's particularly on fire when singing at WOMAD, France, and in
hmm,
Faisalabad for some reason. He's just singing with full gusto. Um,
hmm.
so yeah, there's a lot of archives that came from France, a lot of archives that came from we're looking for archives from Japan, but a lot of archives that came from Canada, for example,
Hmm, hmm.
which is which is interesting because the place which ought to have the most archives is PTV.
Yeah, I
Sadly,
wanted to ask about
they've done
PTV.
a horrible
Hmm,
job of preserving what they have. Uh, and when you ask them for material, they'll just give you what's been digitized already. They're afraid to stick tapes into players because they haven't maintained their players, and there's every risk of the players eating up the tapes, which is something you don't want them to be doing either, right?
hmm, hmm,
So it's a strange position they put you in. If you ask for archives, you keep worrying about who the person you ask will assign
hmm.
it to, and will they end up sticking it in a player that'll only destroy the tape. Um, so
So
in a sense,
PTV.
one's glad they don't go into their archives and try to give you things because in the process they'll end up ruining those precious gems. Uh,
No, but
yeah,
can I
it's
come in for
very
a second?
sad.
Can I want to ask more about like him being athletic because he was swimming and he was, playing basketball, which I was fascinated by when we also heard
Well, he
about it.
wasn't running around between the hoops. He's just standing and shooting a three-pointer with great
Okay.
help from his manager
Okay.
slash secretary.
Okay.
He's in a pool. He's not doing much by way of swimming. I think he's more static. He's even then he's more into music, less into swimming.
Swimming. Okay. Okay. Uh, so that was to cool down. But so the thing about PTV is that did you find anything from there? Because that's a long running problem with PTV that they haven't preserved their archives, and we have spoken about it in other contexts as well. So did you not find anything of use from PTV? Anything that's
But
unseen before?
Nusrat,
Yeah.
no, we did.
Mm,
But again, they end up giving to you what's already been digitized.
okay.
They will not dig through their archives
And look for
and
more.
give you screening copies of material that they have. And so they end up giving you this, they end up giving you just the very tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
PTV, I
Hmm.
bet, has hours and hours and hours and hours of incredible Nusrat footage that no one else has or has ever who has seen in a while.
Okay.
Uh, it's just that they're not equipped to even digitize this material, which is incredibly sad because one ends up, even for Salam, right? Footage of Ziaul Haq, one had to get from the BBC and pay an obscene amount of money to license. I'd
Hmm.
happily have paid that money to PTV.
Hmm.
But that's what makes PTV so interesting. Even the offer of money won't get them to get their act together. Uh,
Okay.
PTV is bizarre and strange. For the longest time, their archival room was water flooded.
Okay.
Uh, the archives were moved out of this room only 3 to 4 years ago.
Hmm. Wow. Okay.
But even now, they sit in a room without proper dehumidification. They're not preserved the correct way. There's no temperature control. It's a terrible shame. And they really need to get their act together by way of preserving archives and making them available to documentary filmmakers. I mean, why else are they sitting on archives, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
PTV's archival repository could become arguably South Asia's most coveted archives. The stuff they have, a lot of which I've seen, well, relatively speaking, I mean, not too many people have bothered to work their way in. What they have is pure gold, pure gold. They have some incredible stuff. We do have some uh, clips of Khan Saab performing way back in the 70s,
Hmm.
and that's some incredible stuff. And we'll need it. I mean, there's no way we can make this film without getting archives from PTV. So somehow we're going to we'll keep asking, we'll keep knocking on their doors
Hmm.
until
Someone has
they
to.
until they agree to help. And they ought to help because it's the story of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, right? It's there's very few
Hmm.
people who make Pakistan proud and who, put Pakistan on the map globally. Khan Saab is one of them. So it'll monumentally suck if PTV doesn't cooperate.
Yeah, I mean but like you're saying, the archives will have to be rescued. It looks like they are not equipped to even, dig through the archives as you're saying at the moment,
Yeah, so when I say cooperate, I mean let us put in our own equipment or
Mm,
loan it to them.
mm.
Um,
Loan it to them. Yeah, yeah.
Loan it to them. I don't think they'd ever agree to let tapes leave the premises, and that's fine. I respect that. But if, either get machines or let other people bring their
Experts
machines
come.
in, bring experts in. But what's really disappointing is PTV is sitting on a gold mine,
Mm,
but it's too A, stupid, B, unimaginative, C, doesn't have access to resources to get their act together.
mm,
Um, Having said that, there's a fair bit of money out there that can be gotten if a
mm,
genuine effort is launched to preserve what PTV has.
mm.
And I think an
Yeah.
initial investment will get it going, and then the sale of the archives could end up preserving PTV's archives. You know,
mean, I'm fairly sure that the funds can be raised, on its yeah,
Given
that's
what they're in possession of, given what they're in possession of. Also, I mean, every anniversary of Javed Miadat's Six at Sharjah, that clip is paid, right? PTV could enforce uh, 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 that it gets royalties or it gets some amount of money for that clip to be airing every year, right? Every Noor Jahan death anniversary, birth anniversary, PTV material is played. Every Zulfikar Ali Bhutto death anniversary, PTV stuff is played, right? Create a mechanism whereby you're compensated for your footage being used. Um, so many other ways in which I mean, documentary filmmaking is increasing, right? There's more and more people wanting to make documentary films from Pakistan. Who wouldn't want to pay relatively little to PTV to license footage of, say, Zia ul Haq, as opposed to paying the BBC, right? The BBC charges an obscene $100 per second. I'm sure PTV's rate card won't be that high. People would rather give money to Pakistan, right? And especially if they know this money is going to be put to good use and preserve archives. Also, what's the harm in giving documentary filmmakers footage of, say, Nazia Hassan? What's wrong with it? But you ask for any kind of benign footage and it goes through bureaucracy and gets stuck in like committees who deliberate upon, whether or not to give the footage to you. Who the hell are these people to butt in to a documentary filmmaker's request for footage? You know, Also,
so
they
there's
conflate programming and archives. So they
hmm.
think you want, so they think, oh, you want all of Dhoop Kinare uh, when you mean archives, or, they don't get the difference. When you're asking for archives, you typically mean news excerpts, relatively short from news. They can't even differentiate between archives and programming. Uh, yeah, they have a long way to go.
Yeah, that's on that very
If
uh
at all they embark on this journey, I
yeah,
don't
on
think
this
they want to begin it.
very grim note. Okay, speaking
Mhm.
of archives and PTV and Ziaul Haq, and of course, I want to ask more about Nusrat and what's next and on, but that can come later. Is Let's go to Salam now. And how did Salam happen? Because you and we first spoke, I think it's been over 10 years, while
Uh,
you were working on Salam at the time, and everybody knew that there is this guy, this science person, that's what how you were known, because as and he's this guy in Karachi, he's making a documentary on Abdus Salam, this Nobel Laureate, Muslim
mm,
Nobel Laureate, who
mhm.
in Pakistan no one acknowledges as a Muslim because he was Ahmadi. And so it looked like this passion project, and we thought, like, how is that going to happen, right? How will this film ever like see light of the day? But then it was
Right.
finally filmed and has critical acclaim, won awards, screened all over the world, and in Pakistan in a way as well. So and of course, Salam is not just about a man, right? It's about Pakistan's tragedy. It's about persecution of minorities. It's about like what has happened to Pakistan's politics 70s onwards. It's an archive. It's history. Please tell us how you decided and thought that you were going to make a film on Salam.
So Salam, my co-producer and dear friend Omar Vandal and I were in college in America. The both of us were pursuing degrees in science. I was studying physics, he was studying biochem. We read Salam's obituary in the New York Times and realized that we didn't know anything about him or knew relatively little about him. And obviously the next question was, why didn't we know enough about him? And the answer was the obvious: he belonged to a persecuted community. And so then at some level we thought, this is an interesting story. Uh, because it was a story that had been kept from us. And when you're young and naive, well, you're young and enthusiastic, anything that's been kept from you, you want to get involved in the telling of. Uh, and then in 2002, we were in New York, and I think post 9/11, one was, one knew that the turban took on significance. And here was a man who showed up in Stockholm wearing a turban, not to blow the place up, but to receive a Nobel Prize in physics, right? And it wasn't just any physics, it was cutting edge physics. It was a landmark contribution to physics. So it was a way, so yeah, the story became more topical. Uh, and that's when we started collecting archives on Salam, watching everything on Salam. I remember it was very difficult to find archives on Salam, but the New York Public Library had some science documentaries that had Salam. So we got them, and, thereby began this journey of finding everything under the sun about Salam. Um, a friend of mine who would visit my place in New York said, there was a bookshelf, and initially it was one book in the bookshelf. And then in a matter of the next 3 years, the entire shelf was full of stuff on Salam, which was an interesting observation. I'd forgotten. Uh, I mean, I was too close to it and didn't have a measure, but the bookshelf became a nice way to sort of measure progress. Um, and then 2004, we set up a company in New York and then formally started working on the documentary. Um, the biggest challenge was raising funds because, there's prejudice against this community runs deep. It took a lot to raise money. We'd fundraise a little, go out and film, fundraise more, go out, film more. Uh, Things became easier once the Higgs boson was discovered, because every other newspaper mentioned Salam as someone who'd, use the Higgs mechanism and thereby establish that the search for the Higgs was meaningful.
Yeah.
And then when Malala won the Nobel Prize, Salam was in the press again because you had to talk about who'd won it earlier, albeit for not for peace, but for, science. That's when things changed. We'd also put a teaser out in the public domain. Uh, Not so grand teaser, but it helped to concretize what was then 10 years of work.
Yeah.
That
Did it take,
showed to people.
how long did
Go
it
on.
take to make and develop and like by till the day it was released?
14 years, 14 long years, 14
Okay.
long years. But I keep saying, even if I had, even so, it took about $720,000 to make. Even if we had the money, and that's because Omar and I didn't take a penny from the project, but even if I had $1 million from day one, I think it would still have taken 5 years, because the sheer expanse of archives that we ended up finding, the sheer um, scope and scale of the film. We filmed in Italy, in the UK, in the US, in Pakistan. Also, Salam's secretary, for example, Anne Garty, was camera shy. The only reason she agreed to talk to us on camera was because she'd seen us laboring on this documentary for what, 12 long years. Um, Also, a lot of people teared up on camera, and they did so because they'd seen how much work we'd put into the film. There is something to be said about how building that kind of rapport helps. Well, people know you mean business, and that you're not going to stop. Also, the son's house, Ahmad Salam's house, right? Salam left behind all his notebooks and his diaries and photographs. And over the course of the 14 years, we must have gone to his house at least 20 times. And so just the familiarity with the notebooks, right? Just being able to go through every single page of the notebook allowed us to really sort of, be able to log. I mean, we knew Salam's archives extremely well. We knew what two things would go together. Anytime Salam spoke and a recorder was on, we pretty much had it. Uh,
Yeah.
all of which was logged supremely well, so that when we brought on Anand Kamlakar, this incredible, brilliant director, editor, he was blown away by the expanse of the archives. But like I'm saying, it only happens, I think, once you spend a really long time and have been able to deep dive into the subject so well that you know every single thing, that you're
Yeah.
intimately familiar. I don't quite have that facility with Nusrat. I'm trying, but there's a difference between doing it over the course of 10
Mm.
years versus having to do it very quickly.
Mm.
Uh, with the span of, let's say a year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah, and besides, Salam was a different kind of a project. It meant something else for you, and Nusrat is a different project. Did you find anything on Abdus Salam, Dr. Abdus Salam from PTV as well? Did they have anything on him?
They had material on Abdus Salam. They did. In fact, there's one episode in which he's in a studio and quotes from the Quran and happens to have brought a copy of the Quran with him. So he opens the Quran and begins to read from it. What's interesting is the reason I was able to find that particular broadcast is because the next day there were fatwas against Salam and the host for, on Salam for reading from the Quran, on the host for allowing it to happen.
What year was this?
I think it
Do
was
you?
a recording from 1982.
Okay.
1982. Yes, 1982. Uh, what was interesting is that piece of hate speech, that fatwa, kind of put a timeline on when the interview was from. So it's funny how such things also can come to one's aid, you know.
Yeah. And you're speaking about his diaries, and I remember from like having watched it a few times that in he said that was he was declared non-Muslim and he couldn't cope.
Right.
And that's an entry from his diary,
That's an
right?
entry. That's an entry in his diary. Declared non-Muslim, cannot cope. September 7th, 1974. Yeah. Uh, yeah, he was pained. He was incredibly pained by that. Um, yeah, those who knew him say he was devastated, absolutely devastated. Um, yeah, I like
So
how the music has come together. I was, I mean, I not that I shared this with the composer, it's a false memory, but it reminds me of the scene from the film Face Off where John Travolta's character is teaching his daughter, who's not his daughter because he swapped faces, how to stab someone and twist the knife so the wound doesn't close. And if you listen to the music that our brilliant composer John McDowell composed to go with Declared Non-Muslim Cannot Cope, it sounds like someone's jabbed you and then twisted the knife. That's the kind of cyclical pattern that the music has. The music for that one particular diary entry, that scenes come together really nicely. I have a false memory of having shared this scene with him, but I'm quite sure it's a false memory and it's not true.
coming back to Salam. So Salam's the documentary is special also, like I said initially, for various reasons. And of course, because of the Ahmadiyya persecution, it's a story of Ahmadiyya persecution in Pakistan, through Salam's story. And I remember when it wasn't released, and it was about to be like a little before that, and when a lot of preparation was sort of, I mean, when mostly producers would be thinking of other things, you were thinking of risk assessments, right?
Mhm.
So, can you talk to us a bit about releasing Salam, the risk assessments, mitigation of those risks, threats, and whatnot, and how were those mitigated? What kind of feedback have you had? Like, has it always been good when you have shown to Pakistanis on various platforms? Um, yeah, I mean, I'm more interested in what the response of Pakistani audiences was to Salam, considering a lot of people, like when you were a student and you hadn't heard of him, there are a lot of people who wouldn't know him, youngsters, right? People who are young now. So, yeah, so yes, please, can you walk us through that time and think and tell us what all happened at that time? Yeah.
So what's interesting is it's been surprisingly well received. I can't figure out why. I'm yet to encounter hateful, negative comments. Very few and far between. I screened it at LUMS, at IBA. Where else? Yeah, a bunch of other places. I sort of
Karachi University, Punjab University, did you manage to go to the
not
couple?
Karachi University, not Punjab University, but public spaces open to the public in Islamabad, it was extremely well received everywhere. Um, Now, obviously, a film like this sort of invites the predisposed, so I can't explain why it was well received. In terms of risk mitigation, we knew, we were concerned, and I spoke to several people, uh, some of whom were progressives in our security intelligence apparatus, and they pretty much said, the only possible people who can rile up people against your film are X, Y, and Z, but know that X is compromised by this and this, Y is compromised by this and this, Z is compromised by this and this. And these people who were progressives in the security apparatus had me make a list as to who all could say nasty things and rile up people. And so I literally put together a list. And then I was also made to make a list of what potentially compromises them. So I was sitting on nukes against them also. Um, it never came to deploying any of these because nothing untoward happened. Now, it could be a function of the film being in English and being on Netflix, which is a subscriber platform, and there's not many people who subscribe to Netflix.
Okay.
Hanif's book is one example. All the while it was only available in English, nothing untoward happened. But the minute it was translated to Urdu, all hell broke loose. And there were attempts to thwart its publication in Urdu, its distribution, blah, blah, blah. I think because it was in English and on Netflix, nothing, it didn't get in an insane amount of traction in Pakistan or traction outside of a small English-speaking audience. If I were to dub it in Urdu, I think all hell would break loose. Or it could possibly. It hasn't been, so it's been pirated also, and made me really happy because I went into a shop and I asked if they had it, and they said, we only pirate films that are in demand. I go in 3 weeks later, and the guy had a copy, a pirated copy of Salam, and so that made me really happy.
Okay.
But I don't think it had massive circulation in Pakistan.
Yeah,
There was some hate speech online, but we managed to. So my wife did sort of online security and managed to block some really freaky hate speech emanating from certain quarters. Other than that, I mean, knock on wood, I can't explain why it was well received.
yeah,
But it's heartening that it
that,
was.
that's good. I guess it's also a matter of who decides to come for something and when, if it serves an agenda, right? Because sometimes things are online, and those who target people based on such issues or stories, they can decide to come for you, or the project, and say like, oh my god, no, you have to ban this, you have to ban that. But yes, the language part, and I think the Netflix part has something to do with, because I mean, although these are two different things, but what happened to Sarmat Khusad's films in the Gita Masha Hai kind of tells us like how things um, can go in the other direction. But that's an Urdu film, Urdu
Yeah.
Punjabi, and it's a commercial film. It was meant to be released here, and then
Again,
the
it's very
TLP.
interesting that you say that because if I forget who, but someone told me that Amir Liaquat said to them that had they come to me, I would have ensured that it would be released.
Zindagi Tamasha Hai.
Zindagi Tamasha. Censorship completely
Yeah.
sucks and it's utterly moronic and it sabotages the progress of the film industry here. These people have no integrity, the people who get in the way of sabotaging a film. Their agendas are often very different from getting in the way of a film for ideological reasons.
Yeah, so you're speaking about Amir Liaquat, this former politician and televangelist who is known to have put targets on the back of the Ahmadiyya, and his uh, TV shows on Geo are directly linked to murders which happened in Karachi of this minority, right? And he's kind of like, he used to do these hate campaigns.
Right, as a master of sophistry, he would be found saying this and that. I am saying everything at the behest of my channel. Uh,
Mm.
you know, uh, and then going on to say, no, uh, what I said, I really meant. I mean, he's
Yeah,
done
yeah.
this so many times. When he was in Geo, he would sort of say things against ARY. When he was on ARY, he would say things against Geo. I mean, this man had zero integrity. I think the bulk of them, I think that's how they come.
Also, maybe when we speak about censorship, I was also thinking of Joyland. In 2022, it just happened that Joyland could not be released properly in Pakistan, and that's where the part of, we're only talking about Amir Liaquat, but also the way Islamist political parties and other turned an issue, the Joyland's release, into, they created an issue out of it. And it's not just because of ideology, they kind of like latched onto it as a political campaigning point and used it to create unrest, to create bad press, and used it for their own political agenda. And the film was kind of used for it, right? Because it's sort of the main protagonist is a transgender, a trans woman. And it's a love story between a man and a trans woman. And of course, the film has, again, critical acclaim, has won awards. It is still to this day banned in Punjab. The film is based in Lahore, and it's
Yeah.
banned in Punjab. It was partially released in Pakistan, and I have yet to see a bad review of Joyland by people who've watched it across the world.
Right.
So that also sort of brings us, you've mentioned India, and brings us to my question that I wanted to ask you, that you have also, how do you look at the potential of Pakistani filmmakers, documentary and other filmmakers, and the fact that the industry, the shape in which the industry exists here, and what are some other obstacles beyond the security concerns? Let's talk about films which cannot be made controversial in any way, right? What do you have to say about that? I mean, I say this as someone who barely watches Pakistani movies. Of course, I've seen Salam, and I've like seen Joyland, and I've seen Mola Jat, which did so well.
Mhm.
But like other movies which are released on Eid and otherwise, I haven't watched a lot of films. I don't watch them, with Myra Khan, with XYZ. Um, I know that they keep producing films, but don't know the quality as such. And
I'm not too much of a fan either, with the exception of, say, Lal Kabutar.
Mhm.
Malajat was, I enjoyed. Could be critical of it, but by and large, I enjoyed it. Um, I mean, the speaking to the rest of your question, if this documentary we developed in Raymond Davis, you sent it off to LA, it was funneled back to India,
Mhm.
right? All things South Asia are sort of sent to India they defer to India. And relations weren't entirely great between India and Pakistan then, or even now, I guess. And so, it was shot down. That's also been the fate of certain other projects that I've sort of sent across. Uh, and that's kind of sad, that we have India sort of uh, as the arbiter of all projects, Pakistan.
Or South Asia.
Apparently, well, yes, all things South Asia. Well, Pakistan in particular, right? Because, they have a bone to pick with us, and vice
Okay.
versa, perhaps.
Mm.
Um, so that sucks. And there's a lot of
That's
other meaningful projects that were good enough to get on Netflix. Lal Kabutar, for example, was good enough to get on Netflix, to be acquired by
Hmm.
Netflix. Ye Tamasha was good enough to be acquired by Netflix.
Okay.
Um, Given our relations, uh, it gets in the way. Such films getting on Netflix, our relations get in the way. I'm told, I don't know how true this is. I'll leave it to you, journalists like you, to verify this. Uh, Apparently, the Supreme Court has been moved in India to validate the ratings of films that are released even on streaming platforms. And that's a device to keep Pakistani content from being released on Netflix. We've had people tell us that
Wow.
even if they wanted to, they couldn't get Pakistani content on Netflix. Um, there's one hears of projects that are originals about to come on Netflix. I don't know if things have changed from what I'd be very surprised if they see the light of day. I hope they do, because it would be wonderful to have our content on Netflix also. Um,
Hmm.
Also, there's some utter trash on Netflix from India, some
Yeah, I
absolutely
agree.
mindless trash,
Hmm.
which should I'm surprised Netflix will commission such, but there it is. Um,
Hmm.
and so if that's good enough, Asif Reza Mir said in an interview that what we make is crap. It's not good enough for Netflix. But is the Indian content, some of the Indian content on Netflix, good enough for Netflix? And I mean, is Netflix now what it used to be earlier? I don't know. But why have one kind of shit and
Is
not the other kind of shit?
Yeah, there is also this whole conversation around, by the way, speaking of Netflix, is the Netflixization of say the Japanese drama, the Taiwanese drama, the Korean drama, right? Because they are having a moment in the world right now. And now the streaming platforms, the way they are they're producing originals, and the way they're impacting production of the dramas in those countries is something which is being criticized, because it's a different sort of like a way of production. It's not just about quality and money, right? I mean, it's about story structure, the pace and whatnot, and so much more. So there is like a criticism of that. I mean, I'm saying this as someone who's not a fan of Squid Games, and Squid Games 2
Oh, oh.
especially not. Yeah, but yeah, so
Apparently, I
that's
believe there's and you know this. There's some incredible Korean dramas on Netflix, which are not originals but acquired material, which is really good.
yeah, actually most of the stuff on Netflix, which are the K drama from like 2005, 2009, 16, 17, 13, 12, are not originals. So the best stuff is that, right? But when you see originals
Right,
in the top 10, that's just like a masala stuff, you know?
right,
Even
right, right.
regardless of the genre. Yeah, so the stuff they have acquired, right? I mean, I would love to have a remastered version of Dhoop Kinare on Netflix. Some of our friends don't like it
Some
when
people were trying, well, remastered, yeah, remastered, but someone was trying to do a 2.0,
okay,
and as
like
in
remaster.
a remake.
They're
No,
now they're
remastered.
now basically. Yeah, yeah, or not remake. They're now also picking up a lot of Japanese dramas from 2009, 10, from the mid-aughts, 13. So
Yeah,
slowly acquiring shows for the platform. But I want to come back to Pakistani films and forget the streaming platforms, right? I mean, you think there is talent here, you think there's creativity here, you think there
oh,
is
yeah.
a potential for this to become a sustainable industry, a profession, and what do we need for that? That's such a broad and vague question. Broad for sure, not vague. I think it's fairly direct. Yeah.
I've been running into people, some of whom are just absolutely incredible. Uh, there's one guy called Samir Asib Khan who's making a documentary on the music scene in Karachi in the
Mm,
60s and the 70s. Brilliant guy, has returned from Amsterdam, wants to really make interesting content. Huge film buff. He's also started these screenings in Karachi called Chalti Tasveerein. There's this other lady called Ayla Khan who's making a film on the early onset of dementia, a very personal story. Uh,
mm,
Really lovely story. She's a grad student at NYU. There's someone who works with me on the Nusrat documentary, Sabika Noor Ali, who's a Patakha Films fellow scholar, I forget, and has made this amazing documentary on lightning strikes in Thar, incidents of which have increased because of coal mining.
mm,
Um, uh, so many more. I was talking to. There's this one idea of someone's dog stayed behind in India during partition, but made it across to Pakistan, where its owners moved to. And so I was
mm,
talking to Mohib about, possible voice actor doing the voice of this dog. Uh, it is, there's a lot of people wanting to make some very interesting films. What doesn't exist is a film fund. What doesn't exist and is desperately needed is money. All of these people are phenomenally bright. It's a treat to have met these people uh, because I'd written off the prospect of making films here. It's too tedious. There's no money available. We're still struggling to raise money for Nusrat. Imagine that. Salam took 14 years to make. Uh, it's terribly sad. Once Salam was out on Netflix, I'd vowed to myself, as did Salam, interestingly, because he spent many years in intellectual isolation in Pakistan. When he got out, he swore to himself that he would make it easier for others and set up an international center for theoretical physics in Italy. I'd also vowed to myself that I would help filmmakers here uh, find monies and cut the journey short for them, because it really shouldn't take anyone 14 years to tell the story of an illustrious Pakistani, or on anything for that matter.
What
It
about state
really shouldn't
patronage
take
and so?
anyone 14 years. There really ought to be a film fund, other than certain quarters in our establishment that doles out money to support films.
State
Who's
patronage?
Sorry, state patronage. The kinds of films they make are extremely narrow, uh, one-dimensional. And inevitably, a lot of brilliant filmmakers end up knocking on those doors, compromising what they're truly capable of producing. We need for films such as one on dementia, one on uh, the music scene in Karachi,
The one on that dog
one on
who
that
made it.
dog, all kinds of films to come out of here. Someone ought to allow a film fund to be created, to which people apply and sort of, you know, get grants to make the films they want to make. Um, the industry will only grow if you let people experiment and play around. Find out, right? No one's letting filmmakers find out to get better.
God, yes, the beep, a moment for beep. Yeah. So what about so coming to your films now? Um, can you tell us something about, or not something, just whatever it is that you can tell us about the other documentary that you're working on that we haven't spoken about?
So this one on Adam Osborne is the my Salam collaborators idea, Anand Kamlakar. Adam Osborne invented the first portable computer. He grew up in an ashram in India. Um, the parents were devotees of this one guru, a spiritual healer, guide. Uh, Osborne had British parents and was shipped off to a boarding school at a young age and hated his parents for doing that to him. Um, Eventually moved to America and invented the first portable laptop. Which did extremely well 1 year. He was at the top of the Bay Area, top of the world. And then he made the mistake of shooting himself in the foot by beginning to advertise a newer iteration of the computer while the existing one was still on shelves,
Hmm.
resulting in no one buying that computer, no one buying the computer that was on shelves. And he ended up going bankrupt in the next year or something. So this crazy story of rise and fall. Uh, Towards the end of his life, he's afflicted with a debilitating neurological disease and ends up having to go back to India, a place he hated.
Hmm.
And that's when that's when he's taken care of by his sister. So he comes back full circle. Um, it's a lovely story. There's a great photo that I saw which got me interested in it, where a young Osborne is trying to run and the spiritual guru is grabbing on the back of his shirt. And it's interesting how he lacked the ruthlessness that the others had in the Bay Area, who were working in the computer industry, and perhaps because of his anchoring in the ashram, he lacked that kind of ruthlessness. Very. So the photo is very symbolic of something kind of holding him back.
So is it
Um,
going to be easier to make that film in terms of
well,
access
so
to a high
so
audience?
we've gotten half of the funding we needed. It's ITVS funded. It'll air on PBS.
Okay,
We're
so
trying to raise the remaining half. Uh, It's a tragedy again. What's interesting is a lot of people um, try to, or let me put it this way: knowledge is accumulated, right? A lot of people, Salam's work was a culmination of a lot of work,
Hmm.
right? There's many people out there who strive to or contribute to a pool of knowledge. Not everyone makes it big and becomes a known. I like
Hmm.
this story because another example is Rosa Parks had a precursor. There was another woman who did exactly the same thing before Rosa Parks. No one's heard of her, but everyone's heard of Rosa Parks.
Hmm.
Adam Osborne has a similar fate. He was a genius, pioneer, but didn't go down in history as a success. We tend to only tell stories of successful people.
Hmm.
Those who come close, we don't quite hear of. But it's important to tell those stories to drive home the point that it takes millennia, it takes decades, it takes centuries for new ideas to emanate, and they're often the result of a long chain of thought and a chain of contributions by several people. We tend to remember the one person who's manifested it. We tend not to remember the many small people who work towards that piece of technology becoming popular. Uh, that's why I found resonance with the story.
Okay. So what's next for Nusrat now? Ustad the film. What's happening? What's
But
left?
um, we have a few interviews to finish,
Hmm.
um, and we're looking for it to be commissioned.
Hmm.
We're we've almost done the production. We're looking for someone to
Hmm.
commission it,
Hmm.
and we're hoping we can make it relatively soon, in a year and a
Oh,
half, and not take 14 years like we've done before. I shouldn't
so
say,
how? What?
I shouldn't
Sorry.
say we, because I'm the only one. I'm the only overlap who spent 14 years making a film.
Yeah. Okay, but what's it like working on sort of producing Nusrat when you and your colleagues are either in different parts of the world or different parts of Pakistan? What's it like producing it this way when internet speed is quite terrible and connectivity is not the best here in Pakistan, from Pakistani's
It's
end?
very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, our work relies on shuttling archives. Our work relies on shuttling footage back and forth. We filmed in London recently and didn't get the footage until we were here. And so just getting it across was supremely difficult. Slow internet speeds are really hurting us.
Mm.
Um, Being in different continents isn't a big deal anymore. If all collaborators agree on what they need to do and just do their bit, that works out. In fact, there's advantages to someone being abroad. Different people who are part of the same team being in different places, because when you're raising funds, that certainly comes in handy. Um, yeah, but yes, the slowed internet speeds have become hugely, hugely problematic.
We've spoken about the films that you've been making, and they're kind of like on sad-ish subjects. What is that one film that you really want to produce on someone who's passed away, and you have like thought of making that film?
Suppose you're obviously alluding to General Rani, Yahya Khan's, I don't know what to call her. Um, yeah, I would love to make that film. Sadly, who's going to give me 8 million to make it? I think
Yeah,
it's the mother, I would argue, of all stories under the sun. It just blows my mind. It's
I
going to
agree.
be supremely controversial in Pakistan. I have more archives on her than anyone else. I have an
Wow,
incredible
you have?
archives, but it's not a documentary that I want to make. I would love to make a film.
Wow.
Um,
Where do we find someone who can play her?
the archives I found by way of sort of learning more about her and wanting to see what she looked like. Just getting a real texture of
Yeah.
of
Could you
of
could
her.
you figure out?
I think Hina Dil Pazir could play her.
Okay.
Fantastic as General Rani.
Oh,
Um, but again, it's it's
this
going
is
to be impossible to get that money to make it. B, who's gonna sort of go around getting
I
people on board to let one make it, be it the family, be it the powers that be it potential investors.
do you think yeah, I mean, depends upon how you make it. I mean, I love that you think Hina Dilpazir can play her. I mean, I like that you have already have an idea because I remember
Farhan
speaking to you.
Tahir could play a Farhan Tahir could play Yahya Khan, Tara Mahmood could play Noorjahan.
Okay.
I've given it a
Really?
lot of thought, but
Really? Tara
yeah,
Mahmood is
but I think if not Tara Mahmood, then Veena Malik perhaps. We've had these conversations.
okay. Yeah. But I just really love the idea of anything on General Rani. It's such a pity that we have nothing. We don't have anything, right? Like on her, has she been an inspiration for a drama ever or a character?
So she was featured in this really terrible Indian film. There's a cameo. Well, it was terrible. It was horrible. Uh,
Okay. Um,
that's arguably the mother of all stories. I mean, if you ask me, I think it's a fantastic story.
yeah,
But
it's really
I don't think I'll have the wherewithal, at least not in the next 10 years, to be able to make something on her.
no, no,
But I would so
be
love
like
to.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
the one benign, non-controversial documentary that one could make could be on Arshad Nadeem. I think that'll be a fantastic story.
I feel like someone is probably already working on that.
A friend called and was told was told to get in line. Was told you're the 13th person to call, get in line. But I have
Okay.
archives on Arshad Nadeem. Uh, I have stuff that people filmed there that
Okay.
they haven't really shared with anyone else. So I have some interesting, unique footage.
So anyone who's looking for archives of Arshad Nadeem, please get in touch with the Zakir
Yeah.
Thaver.
Or Arshad
Yeah.
Nadeem, if you're listening, get in touch with me. I've
Yes,
tried
and
calling him too. I just couldn't get through. But I can imagine how everyone and their mother was probably calling him. I
yeah.
hear he hasn't gotten the money he was promised.
Oh wow. Okay. You do
Doesn't
know that
surprise
like
me.
his story was first picked up by a local alternative independent news site. And then Geo went ahead and like kind of lifted that
Was
story
this?
and then reported on him back in the day. He was
Wow.
originally
Wow.
he was only and it was like an independent news site which basically focuses on non
Wow.
the smaller constituencies like which are not focusing on only in Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad stories, right? And they
Amazing. I had no idea.
yeah, yeah, that's when Arshad Nadeem was first featured on news, and then later on,
Wow.
mainstream media lifted that their story up without any credit or anything, and it was an
Uh,
independent site, and that's and you know because they were looking at all these cities and these sports being played in those cities. So yeah, anyone who works on Arshad Nadeem needs to also like look at like how was he first picked up by news media, right? And became
yeah.
like there was like more light shed on his story. But yes, the General Rani story, you know, I deliberately mentioned it because, you know, that is one story we need. You know, like
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I, I don't even think like I've seen like, other than what you've shown me, a proper photo of hers, you know, except for like very scarce things on like things online. There's little known about her. So yeah, there is that's the that'll be the
There's a
ideal.
book called The Private Life of Yahya Khan,
Yeah,
which is in the public domain.
yeah.
Uh, that's interesting. There's a bunch of articles here and there, but there's enough material to make a film,
Make a film.
and a
Oh,
stellar film at that.
yeah.
But
There is so much
yeah,
more to her, I think, beyond
oh,
Yahya
absolutely.
Khan. Yeah.
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 Incredible
Zakir,
woman.
yeah, incredible. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming
Thank you.
over and you know being so candid about with your views. Initially, we thought that you were not going to be so candid, but eventually you let it go. I'll have to beep a few things.
Please do.
So there, yes, and thanks to our viewers for watching. Khuda Hafiz.